So, if you ever just sat there and looked at the smartphone in your hand, or maybe the laptop sitting on your desk right now, and wondered what kind of mind it actually takes to invent the future, you are in the exact right place.
You really are, because today we are taking you, the learner, on a custom-tailored deep dive into the origins of a true tech icon.
Right. And our mission here isn't just to recite some, timeline of product launches. We really want to explore a profound, almost uncomfortable duality.
Exactly. We want to understand how a sandal-wearing, acid-dropping, Zen-seeking fruitarian hippie transformed into the ruthless, reality-distorting architect of the modern digital age.
It's wild. We are looking at how extreme sensitivity and extreme callousness can somehow coexist in the exact same person to create world-changing innovation.
And to do that, we're drawing from a truly remarkable piece of source material. We got a stack of excerpts from Walter Isaacson's definitive, entirely unvarnished biography of Steve Jobs.
Which is such a great book.
It is. And what makes this text so critical for our understanding is the unprecedented access it represents. I mean, this is based on more than 40 interviews with Jobs himself, conducted over a span of 2 years.
Wow.
Plus interviews from over 100 family members, friends, foes, competitors, and colleagues. And perhaps the most crucial detail here, Jobs asked for no control over the text.
Wait, really? None at all.
None. He didn't even ask to read it before it was published. He explicitly encouraged everyone to speak with brutal honesty.
And the honesty in these pages really is staggering. It challenges a lot of our basic assumptions about what makes a quote-unquote good leader. It forces us to look at how some of the deepest childhood scars can actually act as the fuel for the greatest triumphs.
Yeah, and to truly understand that psychological engine, we have to start long before Apple, right? Long before Silicon Valley. We have to look at the biological and psychological foundation of his life.
The dynamic of being abandoned and the dynamic of being chosen.
Yes. To build that psychological framework, we really have to examine the highly specific circumstances of his birth and his adoption. His biological mother was Joanne Schiebel.
She came from a rural Wisconsin family, right? German heritage.
Exactly. And her father, Arthur Schiebel, was an incredibly strict authoritarian man. He owned a mink farm, among various other businesses, and he demanded absolute control over his family.
I read he had already threatened to cut Joanne off completely over a previous relationship he disapproved of.
He had. So when Joanne, who was a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin at the time, fell in love with a man named Adil Fatah Jandali, well, she knew she was navigating a highly volatile situation.
Jandali seems like a fascinating figure in his own right, though. I mean, he wasn't just some fellow grad student.
Not at all. Jandali came from a very prominent Syrian family. They owned oil refineries and held so much regional power that they essentially controlled the price of wheat in their area of Syria. Yeah. He was highly educated, having attended a Jesuit boarding school and getting his undergraduate degree in Beirut before coming to Wisconsin for his PhD in political science.
And didn't Joanne actually travel to Syria with him at one point?
She did, in the summer of 1954. She spent 2 months there learning to cook Syrian dishes from his family. But when they returned to Wisconsin in the fall, Joanne discovered she was pregnant. They were both 23 years old.
And this is where Arthur Schiebel's strictness basically alters the course of technological history, because they couldn't just get married.
Right. Arthur Schiebel was actually dying at this time, and he explicitly threatened to disown Joanne if she married Jandali.
And in a small Catholic community in 1955, having a child out of wedlock was intensely stigmatized. Abortion wasn't a safe or accessible option either.
So Joanne makes a really difficult choice. She travels to San Francisco, seeking the care of a specific doctor who sheltered unwed mothers and quietly arranged closed adoptions.
But she went into this with one absolute non-negotiable requirement for the adoptive parents, right?
Yes, her child had to go to college graduates.
Which, seems like a fairly standard protective instinct for a mother in that situation. She wanted to ensure a certain level of education and stability, and she thought she had it all lined up.
She did. The doctor arranged for the baby to go to a lawyer and his wife.
But then, when the baby is born on February 24th, 1955, the lawyer and his wife change their minds at the very last second.
They decide they want a girl instead.
Just like that.
Yeah.
Which throws the entire arrangement into total chaos. The doctor has to go to the next couple on his list, and that couple happens to be Paul and Clara Jobs.
And this is where a massive class divide creates a serious standoff. Paul Jobs was a high school dropout.
Right.
He was a tattooed engine mechanic and a Coast Guard veteran from Wisconsin. His wife, Clara, was the sweet-humored daughter of Armenian immigrants who worked as a bookkeeper. Neither of them had graduated from college.
Paul hadn't even finished high school.
Exactly. So when Joanne found out her baby had been placed with this working-class couple, she flat out refused to sign the final adoption papers.
I just can't imagine the tension of that situation. The baby is already living in the Jobs household, settling into their lives, and Joanne is holding out for weeks.
The text notes she was actually hoping that once her father passed away, she could finally marry Jandali and simply take the baby back.
Wow. And her father does pass away in August of 1955, but she still stalls on the paperwork.
She only finally relents and signs the papers because Paul and Clara make a literal, legally binding pledge. They promise to fund a savings account specifically to pay for the boy's future college education.
The historical irony here is just profound because Joanne and Jandali do get married just a few months later.
They do. They eventually have a daughter together, Mona, who grows up to be the celebrated novelist Mona Simpson.
But because it was a closed adoption, it would be over 20 years before Jobs and his biological sister even knew about each other.
Right. But the crucial element for our deep dive today, for you listening, is the psychological imprint this entire adoption process left on Steve Jobs.
Because he knew he was adopted from a very early age. The source text shares this incredibly vivid, honestly heartbreaking memory. Jobs is about 6 or 7 years old. He's sitting on the lawn of his house talking to the girl across the street.
Yeah.
And he mentions that he's adopted. And this little girl looks at him and asks, "So does that mean your real parents didn't want you?"
That is just a devastating question for a child to process.
He described it as lightning bolts going off in his head. He runs into his house crying hysterically. And Paul and Clara sit him down, look him straight in the eye, and deliver a message that would completely define his reality.
They told him, no, you have to understand, we specifically picked you out.
Right. He recalled that they repeated it slowly, putting deliberate emphasis on every single word.
If we take a step back and look at how that moment shapes a developing mind, we see the formation of a very specific psychological triad. Jobs' self-image became built on 3 interconnected pillars: abandoned, chosen, special.
Abandoned, chosen, special.
Yes. Being given up at birth creates a deep, subconscious wound of rejection. But his adoptive parents immediately recontextualized that wound into a narrative of ultimate validation. He wasn't discarded, he was actively selected.
But those two concepts, being abandoned and being chosen, seem like they would create wildly conflicting behaviors. On one hand, you have the abandonment trauma. And his closest friends and colleagues notice this clearly, right?
Oh, absolutely. Del Yocham, who was a longtime Apple executive, observed that Jobs' obsessive desire for complete control over whatever he makes derives directly from the fact that he was abandoned at birth.
He needed to completely control his environment and his products to avoid ever being subjected to the chaos of abandonment again.
It is the ultimate psychological defense mechanism. Think about it. If you control every single variable in a closed system, whether it is the internal layout of a circuit board, the software operating system, or the people working in your company, you can never be caught off guard.
You can never be rejected by the system because you dictate the rules of the system.
Exactly. But then you have the other side of that coin, the chosen and special pillar. His parents made him feel like an absolute exception to the rules of the universe.
And when a child is constantly reinforced with the idea that they are profoundly special and that the normal rules just do not apply to them, it breeds a towering sense of exceptionalism.
Which can easily blur into a justification for cruelty. The source material brings up a really heavy theory from Chris Ann Brennan. She was his high school girlfriend and the mother of his first child.
The broken glass theory.
Yes. She argued that being put up for adoption left him full of broken glass. And her conclusion was that he who is abandoned is an abandoner.
Man. And Andy Hertzfeld, who was one of the key software engineers on the original Mac, echoed this, didn't he?
He did. He felt this underlying theme of abandonment explained why Jobs couldn't stop himself from being reflexively cruel to people at times.
But Jobs himself completely rejected this analysis. He hated the idea that he felt abandoned.
He called it ridiculous and nonsense when people suggested he worked so hard just to make his birth parents wish they had kept him. He insisted, "I have never felt abandoned. I've always felt special."
But if you look at how he spoke about his two sets of parents, the compartmentalization is just staggering. I mean, he was fiercely protective of Paul and Clara.
Very much so.
He said, "They are my parents 1,000%. And he would get furious if anyone referred to them as his adoptive parents.
Right. But then when he was asked about Joanne and Jandali, His biological parents, he said they were my sperm and egg bank. That's not harsh, it's just the way it was, a sperm bank thing, nothing more.
That is an incredibly cold, clinical way to detach from the people who gave you life.
It is. But that clinical detachment is the exact mechanism that allowed him to focus so intensely on his goals.
Huh.
If you can compartmentalize emotional pain, that effectively you can direct all of your cognitive energy into your physical environment.
And his environment, as it turns out, was the perfect incubator for his specific type of genius. Let's look at that physical environment for a second. Paul and Clara eventually moved to a tract house in Mountain View, California.
And Paul is working as a Rico man for a finance company at this point.
Right, he's picking locks of cars, repossessing them, and fixing up used cars in his driveway to sell on the side just to make extra money for the family.
Paul Jobs was fundamentally a man who worked with his hands. He was calm, gentle, and resolute. He marked off a section of his workbench in the family garage and told young Steve, "This is your workbench now."
That's a great dad moment.
It is. And Paul tried his best to pass along his love of mechanics. He would point out the detailing on the cars he was fixing, the lines of the chassis, the vents, the way the chrome was integrated.
Steve wasn't actually that interested in getting his hands dirty with car grease, was he?
No, not really. What stuck with him wasn't the mechanics, but his father's obsessive focus on craftsmanship. There was this beautiful story in the book about building a fence.
Oh, I love this story. Paul is building a fence around their yard, and he gives Steve a hammer to help.
And Paul stops and tells him that it is crucial to craft the hidden back of the fence just as well as the front of the fence.
Even though nobody will ever see the back.
Exactly. This is a profound philosophical lesson disguised as simple carpentry. Paul tells him, you have to do things right, even the parts you can't see.
And Jobs absorbed this completely. Decades later, when he's designing the first Macintosh, he would obsess over the layout of the internal circuit boards.
He demanded that the computer chips line up beautifully, even though the consumer would never, ever open the case to see them.
He even made the engineers sign their names on the inside of the case.
Yes, it is the exact same principle his father taught him about the fence.
And the physical houses they lived in played a massive part in his aesthetic development, too. Their neighborhood was built by Joseph Eichler, a real estate developer who was heavily inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright.
These Eichler homes were designed to bring clean, modern architectural design to the working class.
We're talking floor-to-ceiling glass walls, exposed post and beam construction, flat roofs, radiant heating, built right into the concrete slab floors.
Which serves as an early blueprint for the entire Apple design ethos. Jobs himself realized this connection later in life. He loved that Eichler brought elegant, smart, minimalist design to lower-income people.
It subconsciously programmed his adult tastes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He explicitly connected this childhood environment to his vision for Apple making nicely designed, premium-feeling products accessible for the mass market, like the original Mac or the iPod.
But as much as he learned from his father, there's a turning point in his childhood where his worldview dramatically shifts. And it involves a neighbor named Larry Lang and a carbon microphone.
Yes, Larry Lang. He was an engineer for Hewlett-Packard and a big ham radio operator. One day, he sets up a carbon microphone attached to a battery and a speaker in his driveway.
And Steve talks into it, and his voice is amplified.
Now, Paul Jobs had previously taught Steve that microphones always require an electronic amplifier to work.
Right. So Steve races home and tells his dad that Larry Lang has a microphone working without an amplifier. His dad says he's crazy, there has to be a trick.
So Steve drags his dad down the street to see it, and Paul Jobs looks at it and says, well, I'll be a bat out of hell.
Wait, for those of us who aren't electrical engineers, why does a microphone normally need an amplifier, and what makes a carbon microphone different? Why was Paul Jobs so surprised?
Okay, so it comes down to how sound waves are converted into electrical signals. In most microphones, sound waves hit a diaphragm, creating a tiny electrical current that is way too weak to drive a speaker on its own.
Okay, so it absolutely needs an electronic amplifier to boost that signal.
Right, but a carbon microphone works differently. It contains packed carbon granules. When sound waves hit the diaphragm, it compresses those granules, which changes their electrical resistance.
Oh, I see.
So if you run a direct current from a battery through those granules, the changing resistance directly modulates the current strong enough to drive a speaker.
It doesn't generate its own weak signal. It acts as a variable valve for a stronger external power source.
Exactly. So no electronic amplifier is needed.
Which means Larry Lang was right and Paul Jobs was wrong. It seems like a small neighborhood anecdote, But for Jobs, this was a massive psychological earthquake.
It was. He realizes, for the first time, that his father doesn't know everything. And worse, it dawns on him that he, Steve, is actually quicker and smarter than his parents.
How does a child process outgrowing their protectors?
It's tough. Jobs later confessed that when he realized he was smarter than his parents, he felt a tremendous, overwhelming shame for even having that thought.
It was burned into his mind. It compounded that feeling of being an outsider. First, he was adopted, separating him biologically. Now he was intellectually separated from the loving people who chose him.
And what's wild is that Paul and Clara knew he was smarter than them, and they completely deferred to him. They adapted their entire lives to accommodate his willfulness.
Yeah, like when he was bullied in middle school, he literally gave them an ultimatum. He said, move me to a better school or I will drop out entirely.
And they scraped together every single dime they had to buy a house in a better, safer school district in Los Altos.
Which geographically placed him in the absolute epicenter of the nascent tech revolution. I mean, in the 1950s and 60s, the Santa Clara Valley was booming with military investment.
You had defense contractors like Lockheed building submarine-launched ballistic missiles. NASA's Ames Research Center was right nearby.
Orchards were rapidly being replaced by office parks. Jobs was living among aerospace engineers in surplus parts yards.
He hung out at this massive electronic surplus store called Haltech, digging through bins of salvaged parts from Polaris submarines. It normalized high-tech hardware for a teenager.
And it gave him the audacity to just reach out to the titans of the industry. Because when he was 12 years old, he wanted to build a frequency counter.
Right, and he needed parts.
So he opens the Palo Alto phone book, finds Bill Hewlett, the co-founder of HP, and calls him at his house.
It is a staggering display of precocious confidence. He chats with Bill Hewlett for 20 minutes.
And not only does Hewlett give him the parts, he gives a 12-year-old kid a summer job on the assembly line building those exact frequency counters.
He learned the hustle of the valley early. He was the bargainer, the kid who could talk his way into anything and appreciate the aesthetics of an Eichler home.
But he wasn't a world-class engineer. If he was going to build the future, he needed a pure genius to partner with. He needed the second Steve.
Enter Stephen Wozniak. Woz was almost 5 years older than Jobs, and he was already a legend at Homestead High for his electronics wizardry.
But his background and moral compass were completely different from Jobs's, weren't they?
Oh, totally different. Wozniak's father, Jerry, was a brilliant rocket scientist at Lockheed who exalted engineering above all else. He taught Woz that engineering was the highest calling in society.
And he actively looked down on business, marketing, and sales.
Yes. The contract is unbelievable. Paul Jobs taught Steve how to haggle for used car parts and turn a profit. Jerry Wozniak taught Woz how a resistor worked by breaking it down to atoms and electrons on a chalkboard.
And Jerry taught his son extreme honesty, too. Woz said, "I never lie, even to this day."
He also taught him to avoid ambition entirely. He told Woz, "You always want to be in the middle." Woz just wanted to be an engineer. He was far too shy to be a business leader.
Which made him the absolute perfect complement to Steve Jobs. I mean, think about it. If Wozniak had been deeply ambitious and ruthless, they would have clashed immediately and likely destroyed each other.
Absolutely. Woz's total lack of ambition provided a safe, non-competitive space for Jobs' extreme ambition to flourish.
So they meet through a mutual friend, Bill Fernandez, while Woz is building what they call the cream soda computer in a garage.
And they sit on the sidewalk and instantly bond over two things, electronics and pulling pranks.
Because Woz was famous for his pranks. He once built an electronic metronome that sounded exactly like a ticking bomb.
Right, and he put it in a school locker.
And ended up spending a night in juvenile detention when the principal called the bomb squad.
They also bonded over music, specifically Bob Dylan. They would hunt down Dylan bootleg tapes, buy brochures of lyrics, and stay up late interpreting them.
Jobs later said it was like living at a time when Beethoven and Mozart were alive.
And their prankster alliance culminated at Jobs' high school graduation. They painted a massive banner of a hand, flipping the middle finger, tie-dyed in the school colors.
Oh, man. They rigged it with pulleys on a balcony to drop as the graduating class marched by. They signed it Swab Joe B, combining their initials.
But the true turning point in their partnership, the project that forged the template for Apple, was the Blue Box.
Yes. Let's talk about the Blue Box.
So in September 1971, Wozniak reads an article in Esquire magazine by Ron Rosenbaum about secrets of the little blue box.
Right. It detailed how hackers and phone freaks were hacking the AT&T telephone network.
And the most famous of these freaks went by the name Captain Crunch.
Okay. the Captain Crunch whistle. I've heard this legend forever, but how did a cereal toy actually control a multi-billion-dollar phone company?
It is a fascinating flaw in early network design. In the 1970s, AT&T used what is called in-band signaling.
Okay.
This means the control signals that tell the network where to route a call traveled on the exact same audio path as the voice of the person speaking.
Interesting.
Captain Crunch figured out that the toy whistle included inside boxes of Captain Crunch cereal emitted a perfect 2600 hertz tone.
Why does that matter?
Because 2600 hertz was the exact frequency the AT&T toll switches use to tell each other that a trunk line was idle and ready to route a new call.
No way.
Yeah. If you blew that whistle into the receiver, the system thought you had hung up, but it left the trunk line open. You could then pump in other specific frequencies to route your call anywhere in the world, completely for free.
That is incredible. And the Esquire article actually mentioned that the specific frequencies for all these routing tones were published in an obscure Bell System technical journal.
So Wozniak calls Jobs halfway through reading the article. It's a Sunday. They race down to the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center library, sneak through an unlocked door, and furiously dig through the stacks until Woz finds the journal.
It was a holy grail moment for them. All the frequencies were right there.
Wozniak initially goes out and buys analog parts to recreate the tones, but they aren't stable enough. The frequencies would drift.
So Woz, being the absolute genius he is, designs the first ever digital version of a blue box using diodes and transistors from Radio Shack.
Instead of relying on analog oscillators, he used a digital clock to divide frequencies perfectly. He gets a dorm mate with perfect pitch to help tune it.
And they test it by calling Woz's uncle in LA. It's a wrong number, but the call goes through for free, and then they start having fun. The most famous prank is when they use the blue box to route a call to the Vatican.
Oh, this is legendary. Wozniak decides to pretend to be Henry Kissinger.
Right.
Woz puts on this heavy, terrible accent. We are at the summit meeting in Moscow, and we need to talk to the Pope. It's 5:30 in the morning in Rome.
And they actually get a bishop on the line who is supposed to translate.
But the bishop realizes they are onto him and realizes it's a prank, so they hang up.
Just picture Woz standing in a public phone booth in California trying to wake up the Pope while doing a Kissinger impression. It's hilarious.
It really is.
But the business pivot that happens next is what changes history. Jobs looks at this device, which cost about $40 in parts to make, and decides they shouldn't just play with it.
They shouldn't just give the schematics away to other hackers either. Jobs decides they should manufacture and sell them for $150.
Jobs packages it.
Yeah.
He figures out the casing, the power supply, and the pricing model.
They take on hacker handles. Probus is Berkeley Blue. Jobs is Oath to Bark. And they start doing dorm room demos, calling the Ritz in London or a Dial-A-Joke in Australia to prove it works before asking for the cash.
They sold about 100 of them, right?
They did. But this illicit business comes to a terrifying halt. They are at a pizza parlor in Sunnyvale, trying to sell a blue box to some guys at the next table.
And the guys say they need to get the money from their car. So Jobs and Woz walk out to the car with them, and the guy reaches under the seat and pulls out a gun.
He points it right at Jobs' stomach and says, "Hand it over, brother." Jobs realizes he could slam the car door and run, but he'd probably get shot. So he hands the blue box over.
And in a bizarre twist, the robber gives Jobs his phone number and says he'll pay them later if the box actually works.
Which is crazy. Jobs later called him, tried to explain how to use it, but eventually they decided getting $150 wasn't worth another meeting with an armed gunman.
Yeah, that makes sense. The blue box era ends there, but the foundation of Apple was laid. Jobs later reflected, if it hadn't been for the blue boxes, there wouldn't have been an Apple.
It gave them the confidence that Woz could invent the impossible, and Jobs could package, market, and monetize it. It was the ultimate symbiosis.
But while Woz was perfectly happy designing circuits and working at HP, Jobs was restless. He was searching for something deeper. He was on a quest for a higher plane of consciousness.
Which brings us to his college years, the era of turning on, tuning in, and dropping out.
Jobs' approach to college was a perfect reflection of his passive-aggressive willfulness. Despite his parents' severe financial struggles, he flatly refused to consider affordable state schools like Berkeley, and he turned down scholarships at Stanford.
He insisted on Reed College in Portland, Oregon. It was a private liberal arts school known for its free-spirited hippie lifestyle and rigorous academics, and it was incredibly expensive.
His parents begged him not to go, but he gave them an ultimatum: raid or nowhere.
And then, when his working-class parents drive him all the way to Portland to drop him off, he refuses to even let them on campus.
He doesn't say goodbye. He doesn't say thank you. He just walked away from them.
He later admitted it was one of the things he felt most ashamed of in his entire life. He said he wanted to be like an orphan who just arrived out of nowhere on a train with no roots and no connections.
Once at Reed, he immerses himself deeply in the counterculture. This is late 1972. The political activism of the 60s is waning, replaced by a highly individualized quest for personal fulfillment.
He reads Be Here Now by Baba Ram Dass, which was essentially the Bible for meditation and psychedelics at the time.
He bonds with a friend named Daniel Kotke over Zen Buddhism, Bob Dylan, and LSD. They set up a meditation room in an attic with Indian prints and incense.
And he gets obsessively into extreme diets. He reads Diet for a Small Planet and then a book called Mucusless Diet Healing System by an early 20th century dietary eccentric named Arnold Ehret.
Ehret believed eating only fruits and starchless vegetables prevented harmful mucus from building up in the body.
And Jobs took this to the absolute extreme. He would eat nothing but Roman meal cereal, or just dates and almonds. At one point, he eats so many carrots, his skin literally turns a sunset orange hue.
That's intense. He would go on week-long fasts, claiming the deprivation gave him a ton of vitality and euphoria.
What is crucial to understand here for you listening is how Jobs weaponized this spirituality. He did not use Zen Buddhism to become a calm, peaceful, mellow hippie.
Right. He used it to forge intense focus, an appreciation for stark, minimalist aesthetics, and an unwavering willpower. He was seeking a state of enlightenment, but his natural intensity made inner peace very difficult to achieve.
And speaking of intense personalities, we must talk about Robert Friedland. He was a charismatic older student at Reed, a former LSD dealer who had actually done time in federal prison.
Friedland ran a 220-acre apple farm commune outside of Portland called the All One Farm. Jobs would go there to prune the Gravenstein apple trees and hang out with the Hare Krishna monks who had moved in.
Daniel Kotke noted that Friedland had an enormous impact on Jobs. Friedland was charismatic, a bit of a con man, and could bend situations to his strong will.
He taught Jobs how to command a room, how to hold a gaze without blinking to intimidate people, and how to project absolute certainty even when he was making things up.
Kotke explicitly stated that Friedland taught Steve the reality distortion field.
It is a remarkable piece of history that a charismatic ex-con commune leader essentially taught one of the greatest CEOs in history how to project leadership.
But Jobs eventually sees through the materialism of the commune and leaves. He also gets incredibly bored with the structure of college. He hates taking required classes.
So, feeling guilty about spending his parents' life savings on an education he didn't care about, he formally drops out.
But Reed College was very lenient, and they allowed him to drop in. He stopped paying tuition, but he stayed on campus.
He slept on the floor of friends' rooms, returned glass Coca-Cola bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food, and walked across town every Sunday to get one good free meal at the Hare Krishna temple.
And because he had dropped the required classes, he could audit whatever he found interesting, which leads him directly to a calligraphy class taught by a Trappist monk.
He learns about serif and sans serif typefaces, variable letter spacing, and the historical beauty of typography.
As Jobs later pointed out in his famous Stanford commencement address, if he hadn't dropped in on that single course, the Macintosh would never have had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts.
And since Windows essentially copied the Mac, personal computers as we know them might never have had beautiful typography.
After a year and a half of this bohemian existence, Friedland urges Jobs to take a spiritual journey to India. Jobs wants to go to seek enlightenment and figure out who he is, driven deeply by the whole left from not knowing his birth parents.
To fund the trip, Jobs moves back to his parents' house in California and looks for work. He walks into the lobby of the video game company Atari.
He's wearing sandals, he's completely unkempt, and he tells the personnel director he won't leave until they give him a job.
Al Alcorn, the chief engineer who created Pong, is amused by his audacity and hires him as a technician for $5 an hour.
But Jobs' abrasive personality and terrible hygiene quickly become a massive problem. He firmly believed his fruitarian diet prevented body odor, so he didn't use deodorant or shower regularly.
He was wildly incorrect about that. He also routinely called his coworkers dumb shits and alienated almost everyone on the floor.
Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari, solves this problem creatively. He likes Jobs' philosophical nature, so instead of firing him, he banishes Jobs to the night shift where he works mostly alone.
And Bushnell becomes another massive influence on Jobs. He teaches Jobs that if you act like you can do something, it will work. He explicitly told him, pretend to be completely in control and people will assume that you are.
To get to India, Jobs convinces Al Alcorn to pay for his flight to Germany first, to fix an engineering problem Atari was having with interference on their European games.
Jobs solves it, completely offends the German managers with his hygiene and table manners, and then flies from Switzerland to New Delhi.
The India trip is a brutal physical experience for him. He gets dysentery almost immediately from drinking unfiltered water, dropping from 160 pounds to 120 pounds.
He wanders the Himalayas. At one point, a young Hindu holy man pulls him out of a crowd, laughs maniacally, takes a straight razor, and shaves Jobs' head.
It's wild.
Did he actually find what he was looking for? Because the image of a future tech CEO wandering the Himalayas in saffron robes seems so disconnected from building circuit boards. Did he find a guru?
He spent 7 months wandering, experiencing deep deprivation. But he did not find a singular guru. However, he found a concept that would fundamentally shape his career.
Which was?
He realized that the people in the Indian countryside relied heavily on intuition rather than Western rational intellect. Jobs later said, intuition is a very powerful thing, more powerful than intellect. That's had a big impact on my work.
How does that actually translate to technology, though?
Well, a non-Western, non-rational approach fundamentally changes how you design consumer electronics. Western engineering focuses on specifications, processing power, gigahertz, and logical capability. It's about what the machine can do.
Right.
Intuitive design focuses on how a device feels and how naturally human interacts with it. It assumes the users shouldn't need a manual. It is about emotional resonance and simplicity, not just raw computation.
He was doing some heavy emotional work upon returning, too. He tries Arthur Janoff's primal scream therapy to deal with the pain of his adoption.
He does. But he also develops this unshakable, almost frightening confidence in his own will.
Oh, the story with the car. There's this crazy story where he's driving his Ford Ranchero with a girlfriend, Elizabeth Holmes, not the Theranos founder, a different Elizabeth Holmes.
He decides he wants to sleep. So while driving down the highway at full speed, he forces her to get behind the wheel.
She didn't even know how to drive a stick shift. He shifts the gears from the passenger seat until they hit 55 miles per hour, puts on a Bob Dylan tape, lays his head in her lap, and goes to sleep.
It perfectly illustrates the reality distortion field in action. Holmes later said, he had the attitude that he could do anything and therefore so can you. He put his life in my hands. So that made me do something I didn't think I could do.
Okay, so he returns from India, head shaved, wearing saffron robes, and walks back into Atari. Alcorn gives him his job back on the night shift.
And this leads us to the breakup betrayal, which is one of the most defining ethical fractures in his early life.
Nolan Bushnell wanted a single-player version of Pong, where you hit a ball against a wall of bricks. He called it Breakout.
He assigns it to Jobs, offering a base pay, plus a bonus for every computer chip fewer than 50 that he uses in the final design.
Bushnell knew Jobs wasn't a great engineer, but he knew Jobs would recruit Wozniak, who was always hanging around the Atari offices playing free arcade games at night.
So Jobs goes to Woz and says they have to design this game in 4 days and they have to minimize the chips.
But he completely hides the fact that the 4-day deadline is self-imposed because Jobs wants to go to the all-one farm for the apple harvest.
And worse, he doesn't mention a word about the bonus money tied to the chip production.
Wozniak, who is still working full-time at HP during the day, stays up 4 nights in a row at Atari. He achieves the impossible, designing the game using only 45 chips.
It was a masterpiece of efficient engineering. Jobs gets paid the base fee, plus a substantial bonus for the saved chips.
I have to stop you there. He stole from his best friend, over a few $100s.
He did. Jobs only gave Woz half of the base fee, claiming that was all Atari paid them. He pocketed all of the bonus money himself. He lied to his best friend.
And Wozniak didn't find out the truth for 10 years until he read about it in a book on the history of Atari.
Exactly.
How did Woz react when he found out? Because if my best friend did that to me, the partnership is over.
Wozniak was deeply hurt. When looking back on that betrayal, you really see the dividing line between how the two of them viewed the world.
Yeah.
Wozniak said, ethics always mattered to me, and I still don't understand why he would have gotten paid one thing and told me he'd gotten paid another.
But Wozniak ultimately accepted it, realizing that Jobs' manipulative ruthlessness might be a required trait for building a company like Apple.
Wozniak admitted he could never be that way, but he also acknowledged he could never have built the empire on his own.
It really makes you reflect on the nature of leadership. are the traits that make someone a loyal, honest, great friend, mutually exclusive from the traits that make them a world-conquering CEO. It's a tough pill to swallow.
It is.
But with the confidence gained at Atari and Wozniak's continuing brilliance in circuit design, the stage was set for the dawn of the personal computer revolution. We enter a period where the counterculture of the Bay Area violently collides with the defense contractor geek culture.
Stuart Brand is a massive cultural figure here. He published the Whole Earth catalog, which Jobs loved. The subtitle of the catalog was Access to Tools.
Brand and others began shifting the narrative around computing. In the 1960s, computers were seen as Orwellian control mechanisms used by the Pentagon and giant corporations to manage the masses.
But the hackers and hippies of the 70s began to see computers as potential tools of personal liberation.
This ethos completely crystallized in the Homebrew Computer Club. It was a gathering of hobbyists in Menlo Park where they shared ideas, schematics, and parts.
Wozniak went to the very first meeting in March 1975. He saw a specification sheet for a microprocessor and had an absolute epiphany.
He realized he could put the capacity of a mini-computer inside a terminal with a keyboard and a screen, creating a standalone personal computer that could sit on a desktop.
Wozniak spends months moonlighting at HP, handwriting the code because he couldn't afford to rent computer time.
On June 29, 1975, he types a few keys on a keyboard, and the letters display on a screen.
He later said it was the first time in history anyone had typed a character on a keyboard and seen it show up on their own computer screen right in front of them.
True to the hacker ethos of the Homebrew Club, where the prevailing belief was that information wants to be free, Wozniak wanted to give his schematics away for free to anyone who wanted to build one.
But Jobs, embodying the entrepreneur ethos, insisted they should build and sell printed circuit boards to save people the trouble of wiring them from scratch.
He tells Woz, even if we lose our money, we'll have a company. For once in our lives, we'll have a company.
They need a name for this company. Jobs had just come back from pruning trees at the All One farm. He was on one of his fruitarian diets. He proposes Apple Computer.
He liked it because it sounded fun, spirited, and it took the edge off the intimidating word computer.
And brilliantly, from a marketing perspective, it put them ahead of Atari in the phone book.
To formalize the partnership, Jobs recruits Ron Wayne. He was an older draftsman from Atari, and Jobs brings him in to act as a tiebreaker between him and Woz.
Wayne drafts a 3-page partnership agreement, taking a 10% stake in the company. But Wayne gets cold feet almost immediately.
Because it was a simple partnership, all three men were personally liable for any debts the company incurred. Wayne had a house, a car, and assets. Jobs and Wozniak had nothing to lose.
So, just 11 days after signing the papers, Wayne walks away, selling his 10% stake back to them for $800.
That 10% stake would be worth hundreds of billions today. It is often cited as one of the most tragic financial mistakes in history.
But Wayne later claimed he had no regrets, saying he knew his stomach wasn't ready for a ride with two whirlwinds like Steven was.
It tells us so much about risk, fear, and knowing your own psychological limits. Meanwhile, Jobs is out hustling.
He goes to Paul Terrell, who owned the Byte Shop, one of the first computer stores, and pitches the bare circuit boards.
Terrell says no. He knows the average consumer doesn't want to solder components. He wants fully assembled computers, and he orders 50 of them at $500 apiece, cash and delivery.
Jobs is stunned. They need $15,000 in parts just to fulfill the order, which they don't have.
He begs for credit from part suppliers, gets 30 days net, and turns his parents' house in Los Altos into an assembly line.
His dad built a burn box in the garage. His pregnant sister Patty, his friend Daniel Kopke, and Elizabeth Holmes are all drafted to help plug chips into boards.
And we see Jobs' extreme perfectionism immediately. Holmes gets yelled at by Jobs for getting solder flux on a chip.
Right.
Wait, what was the burn box and what is solder flux? Why was he yelling at people who were basically doing him a favor?
A burn box is an enclosed, heated box used to stress test electronic components. You run the boards inside the heated box to ensure the chips won't fail under a heavy thermal load once the customer buys them.
Okay, got it. And solder flux.
Solder flux is a chemical paste used to help the liquid metal solder flow and bond properly to the circuit board. It's essential for the connection, but it leaves a sticky, ugly residue if it isn't carefully cleaned off.
Jobs was demanding physical perfection. Even though this was just a circuit board going to hobbyists, He couldn't stand the idea of it looking messy.
Exactly. It's a mad scramble. But they deliver the 50 boards to the bite shop just in time to pay off the parts suppliers.
The Apple I was essentially a messy circuit board that customers often bolted into a wooden cigar box or a briefcase. It was a hobbyist dream, but Jobs realized that to truly change the world, the product needed to look like a friendly, integrated household appliance.
That realization leads directly to the Apple II and the professionalization of Steve Jobs.
Jobs had this grand vision for the Apple II, a fully packaged computer ready to run right out of the box. He wanted a fanless power supply so it would run silently, unlike the clunky, noisy machines of the era.
He conned a brilliant, chain-smoking Marxist engineer named Rod Holt into designing a revolutionary switching power supply.
Stop there. Why was the switching power supply such a big deal? Older computers use linear ones, right? What's the difference?
Exactly. Older computers use linear power supplies. Think of a linear power supply like a faucet that is always running at full blast, and to get a gentle stream, you force the excess water down the drain.
Okay.
In electronics, that excess voltage is turned into heat. It generates so much heat that you need big, loud fans to keep the computer from melting.
Right.
Rod Holt designed a switching power supply. Instead of burning off excess power, it toggles the power on and off incredibly rapidly, thousands of times a second, only taking the exact amount of energy it needs to average out the correct voltage.
This meant very little wasted energy, which meant very little heat, which meant Jobs could eliminate the cooling fan entirely. The computer would be silent.
That is brilliant. And for the case of the computer, Jobs was inspired by a sleek Cuisinart food processor he saw at Macy's. He hired a consultant to design a light, foam-molded plastic case.
But tooling plastic cases in mass manufacturing requires serious capital, way more than they made from the bite shop. They flirted with selling the company to Commodore, but Jobs thought their leadership was sleazy.
So Nolan Bushnell points Jobs to Don Valentine, a venture capitalist, who in turn points Jobs to Mike Markkula.
Markkula is a fascinating character in Apple's history. He was 33 years old, already retired after making millions in stock options at Intel. He drove a gold Corvette convertible.
He visits the Jobs garage, looks past Jobs' wispy beard and terrible hygiene, and sees the absolute genius of what Woz and Jobs are building.
He writes their business plan and personally guarantees a $250,000 line of credit for a one-third stake in the company.
Markkula becomes a father figure to Jobs, teaching him about marketing, sales, and corporate strategy. He wrote a one-page paper titled The Apple Marketing Philosophy with 3 core points: empathy, focus, and impute.
Empathy meant intimately understanding customer needs better than any other company. Focus meant eliminating unimportant opportunities to do a few things perfectly.
But impute is the holy grail here. Let's really look at impute. Markkula wrote, "People do judge a book by its cover."
Let's linger on that for a second. It sounds shallow, but it's a profound psychological truth. If you present a product in a slipshod manner, it is perceived as slipshod.
Right.
If you present it in a creative, professional, premium manner, you impute the desired qualities into the mind of the consumer before they even turn the machine on.
Think about how this applies to everyday life for you listening. How you dress for an interview, how you design the thumbnail for a video, how you plate food at a restaurant, you are imputing value.
This principle became the defining DNA of Apple for the next 40 years. Jobs obsessed over it. It is why Apple packaging is so incredibly tactile and premium today, with boxes that open with a perfectly timed swoosh of air.
It is why he hired Regis McKenna, the Valley's top PR man, to launch the Apple II. McKenna's art director, Rob Janoff, designed the iconic Apple logo with the bite taken out of it, replacing Ron Wayne's old Victorian woodcut drawing of Isaac Newton.
And Jobs applied impute heavily to the launch at the West Coast Computer Fair. While other companies had messy tables with loose wires and cardboard signs, Apple had a booth draped in black velvet with a backlit plexiglass logo.
Jobs even made sure he and Woz wore tailored 3-piece suits. They looked like teenagers going to prom, but the imputation worked. They secured 300 orders at the show.
However, Markkula knew that Jobs was too temperamental, tyrannical, and unwashed to actually run the company day to day. The engineers couldn't stand him.
So Markkula brought in his friend Mike Scott to serve as president. Scott's primary job was simple manage Steve Jobs.
Which went exactly as poorly as you'd expect. Scott was tightly wound, and Jobs categorically hated authority. They fought bitterly over everything.
Jobs cried over warranty lengths. He obsessed over the exact shade of beige for the plastic case and the exact curvature of the rounded corners. Scott just wanted to finalize decisions and ship products.
The most childish battle was over employee badge numbers. Scott assigned badge number 1 to Wozniak, acknowledging his role as the inventor, and badge number 2 to Jobs.
Jobs threw an absolute tantrum, crying, demanding to be number 1. Scott refused to back down and feed his ego. Finally, Jobs found a loophole and demanded badge number 0.
It's absurd, but it makes you ask how essential is adult supervision to raw genius. Without Mike Markula providing the funding and the philosophy, and without Mike Scott forcing decisions and keeping the trains running, Jobs' perfectionism probably would have destroyed Apple before the Apple II ever reached the market.
He needed friction to forge the product.
But while Jobs was fiercely controlling every pixel, every plastic corner, and every badge number inside Apple, he was simultaneously losing total control of his personal life. And he used his reality distortion field to completely ignore it.
This brings us to a really dark chapter. Jobs was living in a rental house in Cupertino with Daniel Kotke, which they jokingly called Rancho Suburbia.
His on-again, off-again high school girlfriend, Chrisanne Brennan, moves into one of the bedrooms. Soon after, Chrisanne becomes pregnant.
And Jobs completely emotionally detaches. He was incredibly cold. He simply shut the reality of the pregnancy out of his mind.
He publicly and privately denied paternity, claiming he wasn't the only one she was sleeping with, even though Chrisanne knew he was the father, and most of his friends knew he was the father.
Daniel Kotke said, "I just think he couldn't access that part of his brain or the idea of being responsible."
Elizabeth Holmes noted that he considered the option of being a parent and the option of not being a parent, and just decided to believe the latter because he had other plans for his life.
When you look at that behavior, you see the dark side of the reality distortion field. The exact same mental mechanism that allowed him to bend physics, force engineers to build the breakout game in 4 days, and manifest the fully integrated Apple II out of thin air, allowed him to simply erase a human being from his mental reality.
He willed the Apple Tech into existence, and he tried to will his daughter out of existence.
The psychological mirroring here is just haunting. He's 23 years old. That is the exact same age his biological parents were when they had him and abandoned him.
The boy who was deeply traumatized by being given up is now abandoning his own biological child. Chrisanne decides to keep the baby, a girl named Lisa, while Jobs remains entirely disconnected from the situation.
When you dedicate all of your humanity, all of your emotional capacity, and all of your focus into perfecting a product, you have to ask what is left for the people around you.
His capacity for empathy was channeled entirely into the consumer's experience with a machine, leaving almost none for the mother of his child.
It is a heavy place to land, but that is the crucible of contradictions where the future was built. We've traced the journey from the working-class garages of Silicon Valley through the spiritual quests of India and the counterculture communes to the massive corporate launch of the Apple II.
We see this synthesis of Eastern mysticism, hacker culture, and ruthless capitalism.
We see a man who used his deepest childhood wounds to fuel a desperate need to control his environment, creating beautiful, closed systems that changed the world while leaving significant emotional wreckage in his wake.
Exactly. Learner, we celebrate the concept of thinking differently and bending reality to our will. We all want to leave a dent in the universe, but this exploration leaves us with a haunting question to chew on as you go about your day.
If the ability to selectively ignore reality and obsess over perfection is the exact formula required to invent the future, are the traits that make a visionary fundamentally incompatible with the traits that make a decent human being?
And if you had to choose between changing the world and being at peace with it, which would you choose? I want you to close your eyes and just completely transport yourself back to June of 2019.
Okay.
We are in San Jose. It's the Worldwide Developers Conference, WWDC. Basically the Super Bowl of the tech world.
Right. The air is usually electric at these things. You've got thousands of developers, billions of dollars on the line. It's the absolute epicenter of the industry.
Exactly. But I want you to imagine we aren't out on the main stage right now. We're zooming in on this specific dimly lit corridor backstage. And standing there, just leaning against a wall, is a man who looks like he's waiting for a bus that's never going to come.
Wow.
Yeah, he's wearing these linen pants, a woven cardigan. It's that rich, casual aesthetic, the kind that costs more than a Honda Civic, but is supposed to look effortless.
Which tells you exactly what we're talking about. This is Sir Joni Ive, the man who, honestly, arguably designed the modern world.
Right.
I mean, if you've touched a smartphone, a laptop, or a tablet in the last 20 years, you have touched something that started in this man's sketchbook. He is the wizard behind the curtain.
But in this corridor, he doesn't look like the god of design. The book describes him checking his watch, and keep in mind this is a watch he designed, and he's nitpicking it.
Of course he is.
Yeah, he's noticing how the light hits the curve, finding these tiny flaws nobody else on Earth would ever see. He just looks so bored. He looks depleted, like a bit player at his own company's event.
And that boredom is really the first major clue that something is wrong.
Right.
Because suddenly the whole energy in that hallway shifts.
Right.
The doors fly open and in walks the new Apple. Tim Cook enters the room.
And it's not just Cook, it's the noise.
Yeah.
The book describes this deafening click of camera shutters. It's the paparazzi, the news anchors, boom, mics swinging around like swords. Cook is the sun, right?
Yeah.
And the entire room creates this massive gravity well around him. He is flanked by media, shaking hands, just fully the center of the universe.
And Joni Ive.
He's just a moon fading into the background.
It's such a striking image.
Yeah.
And it leads to this moment where they have to perform this ritual. It's what the author calls a set piece of contrived spontaneity.
That's a great phrase.
It really is. They are standing over the new Mac Pro, the infamous cheese grater tower.
Oh, right, the one with all the aluminum holes.
Exactly. And they have to pretend, for all these cameras, that they are having this genuine moment of discovery. It's tragic theater.
Yeah.
You have Cook, who is decidedly not a product guy, feigning all this curiosity about aluminum vents and airflow. And you have Ive, the artist who literally poured his soul into this machine, just looking at the exit door.
He's physically there, but spiritually.
Spiritually, he is long gone. He's checking the time, just waiting to bolt.
And that super awkward photo op is essentially the thesis of the deep dive we are doing today. We are breaking down, after Steve, how Apple became a trillion-dollar company and lost its soul by Trip Mickle.
And the core question we're trying to answer isn't just why Joni Ive eventually left.
No.
It's something much bigger. It's the question of what happens when the artist is slowly, methodically eclipsed by the operator. It's a story about a drift.
Exactly. How did we get from the reality distortion field of Steve Jobs to a company that is, at its core, essentially a highly profitable, high-end logistics firm?
Right.
To really understand that moment in the corridor in 2019, we have to go back to the day the music died, October 2011.
Specifically, the launch of the iPhone 4S.
Yeah.
This was the Let's Talk iPhone event.
Held at Apple's town hall. Now, the context here for you listening is everything. Steve Jobs is alive, but barely. He's bedridden at his home in Palo Alto.
The whole world knows he's sick.
Right. But inside Apple, there is this desperate, almost irrational hope.
It's the denial phase of grief. Before the grief has even fully started, the top executives, Phil Schiller, Scott Forstall, Eddie Q, they are all at the town hall. And they have done something incredibly heartbreaking.
They saved a seat.
Front row, right on the aisle. They draped a black cloth over it with a sign that just said, reserved.
For Steve?
Yeah. And there was this whisper running through the crowd, people saying, maybe he'll come. Maybe he'll walk out for one more thing.
But the chair just stayed empty. And instead of Steve, the world got Tim Cook's debut as CEO.
And we really need to talk about this debut because it completely sets the tone for the next decade. Today, we see Tim Cook as this very polished statesman of tech.
Very steady.
Very steady. But in 2011, the book calls this performance off-Broadway.
Meaning it just wasn't ready for the big stage?
Exactly. Steve used to rent out the massive Moscone Center in San Francisco, huge screens, theatrical lighting. Cook held this event on the Apple campus. It was smaller, safer.
And his presentation style was, well, he's not a showman. He's the wizard of spreadsheets.
He wore this really stiff black button-down shirt. He tried to crack a joke that completely failed to land. And then what did he do?
He hit them with data.
Pie charts, growth rates, store traffic numbers. He's up there saying, we sold this many Macs, retail stores are up X%.
It was a quarterly earnings call masquerading as a product launch.
And the reaction was just brutal. The stock actually dropped 5% while he was still talking.
While he was still on stage.
Still on stage. The tech press called it underwhelming. Everyone looked at this guy and thought, this is not Steve. The magic is gone.
And Cook knew it. The executives knew it. But the real emotional hammer drop came right after the event wrapped up.
Right. They walk off stage, probably feeling pretty bruised by the reception, and they get a text message.
From Lorene Powell Jobs, Steve's wife.
Dang, come to the house.
Now, if I'm an executive who just delivered a super lackluster keynote and I suddenly get summoned to Steve Jobs' house, I am absolutely terrified.
You're thinking he watched the live stream and he's going to tear you apart.
I'm bracing for impact.
That's exactly what they thought. They raced to Palo Alto, fully expecting to be screamed at. But when they walked in, the atmosphere wasn't angry at all.
It was somber.
Very. Joni Ive was actually already there, and he was in the process of leaving. Lorene met the executives and told them he's not angry. He just wants to say goodbye.
That honestly gives me chills.
Steve died the very next day, October 5, 2011. And there's a detail from the book that really stuck with me here.
What's that?
The notification of his death, the one that read Stephen P. Jobs, Apple co-founder, dead at 56 seconds. It popped up on the screens of the iPhones being held by the employees right there at Infinite Loop.
They learned about the death of the creator on the very device he created.
It's poetic and devastating all at once. And it kicked off a massive existential crisis for the company.
Because we have to remember, Apple wasn't just a regular tech company. It was essentially a cult of personality. Without the leader, that what would Walt do paralysis immediately set in.
Right, referencing Walt Disney, which
Yeah.
was something Steve was totally obsessed with.
He was terrified of it, wasn't he?
He was. He saw exactly how Disney stagnated for years after Walt died because everyone was just too afraid to innovate.
They just kept asking, what would Walt have done in this situation?
Exactly. And Steve explicitly told Tim Cook before he died, never ask what I would do. Just do what's right.
But saying that is one thing. Doing it when you're staring at that empty chair in the town hall is another. Tim Cook had to somehow stabilize this massive ship.
So he sent out that famous memo to the staff. Apple is not going to change.
Which was a lie.
A completely necessary lie to keep the employees calm and keep the stock market from entering freefall, sure, but a lie nonetheless.
Because Apple had to change. The man who ran the entire operation by gut instinct and sheer force of will was gone. The man who ran it by spreadsheet was now in charge.
And nowhere was this tectonic shift felt more acutely than inside the design studio.
The Holy of Holies. I love that the book calls it that. Paint the picture for us. What was this place actually like?
It was located in Building 2 on the old campus. It had these heavy tinted windows that blocked any prying eyes from looking in. Intense security.
It was a fortress.
A total sanctuary for Joni Ive. Under Steve, this room was the absolute center of the Apple universe. Steve would visit almost every single day, usually right around lunchtime.
It was a ritual for them.
It was. He'd walk in, Joni would pull back these black cloths covering all the secret prototypes, and they would just talk.
Just the two of them.
They would obsess over the microscopic curve of a corner or the exact texture of a piece of milled metal. They were spiritual partners. Steve fiercely protected the artists. He was the impenetrable wall between the design studio and the business guys.
The bean counters.
Right. And then Steve is gone. And Tim Cook is running things. And Tim Cook does not visit every day.
He barely visits at all.
And the book has this one specific anecdote that just perfectly captures the cold reality of this new era. It's the show and tell moment.
Oh, man. This part is painful to read.
It really is. So the design team is totally used to Steve coming in, getting super animated, shouting, critiquing, literally feeling the product in his hands.
Having an emotional reaction to it.
Exactly. Well, Tim Cook finally comes by the studio for a design review. Joni excitedly hands him a physical model of a new product. Cook takes it. He picks it up. He doesn't caress it. He doesn't rotate it in his hands to see how it catches the light. He just holds it.
Like a brick.
Like a unit of inventory. He just stares at it blankly. He doesn't have any kind of emotional reaction whatsoever.
Wow.
And all these incredibly passionate designers are standing there watching this happen, and you can almost hear the collective sinking realization in the room. They realize he doesn't get it.
Because to Tim Cook, that object isn't magic, it's logistics.
Exactly. It's supply chain, it's margins, it's shipping weights and dimensional packing. And that protection, that magical barrier Steve provided against the corporate machine, it just evaporated in that single moment. The artists were suddenly totally exposed to the operators.
And we keep using this term operator for Tim Cook. It can almost sound a bit derogatory, like we're just calling him a glorified bean counter, but the book makes it very clear that this isn't just about him liking math. This is a fundamental religious difference in how to run a global company.
It's a completely distinct doctrine.
The Cook doctrine.
Right. You have to remember, Tim Cook isn't a product visionary. He's a supply chain genius. He grew up in Robertsdale, Alabama, the son of a shipyard worker.
Very blue-collar roots.
Yes, and his entire rise at Apple wasn't built on coming up with insanely great ideas. It was built purely on relentless efficiency.
So what is the core tenet of this Cook doctrine?
The core tenet is that inventory is fundamentally evil.
Okay, let's break that down for you listening, because that sounds counterintuitive. Most stores rely on inventory. You literally need stuff to sell stuff.
So think about a banana. If you buy a fresh banana at the store and let it sit on your kitchen counter for a week, what happens?
It turns brown, it gets mushy, it loses its value. Eventually, you just throw it out.
Tim Cook views computer hardware exactly like bananas. He genuinely believes that the value of a smartphone or a laptop depreciates by 1 to 2% every single week that it sits inside a warehouse.
Because technology moves so incredibly fast.
Exactly. Components get cheaper, new screens are developed, faster chips come out. So if you were holding on to pallets of parts, you are literally losing millions of dollars a day in depreciation.
So his absolute genius was making Apple asset light.
Precisely. When he took over the operations side under Steve years prior, he slashed the inventory holding period from months down to mere days.
That's a massive reduction.
It was revolutionary. He closed down Apple's own factories and outsourced basically everything to Foxconn in China. He wanted parts to arrive at the assembly line mere hours before they were bolted into an iPhone.
So he was managing Apple not like this artisanal workshop, but like a massive dairy farm.
Fresh in, fresh out. If it sits, it spoils.
That is incredible efficiency, absolutely. But it creates a very specific type of corporate culture. If your CEO is constantly obsessed with days of inventory, he's probably not spending his time staring at the curvature of a glass screen wondering if it feels emotional enough.
And that's the massive friction point. To an artist like Joni Ive, efficiency is the enemy of perfection. Art takes time. It takes waste.
You have to try things that fail.
Right. It takes exploring 10 entirely wrong avenues to find the one brilliant right one. But to an operator like Cook, waste is a mortal sin.
And Cook naturally brings in people who think exactly like him to run the show. We're introduced to a guy named Jeff Williams, who the book refers to as Tim Cook's Tim Cook.
Which is just a terrifying concept if you're on the creative team.
Totally.
Jeff Williams is the ultimate operations guy. He drives a completely standard Toyota Camry, even though he's making millions of dollars a year.
Very practical.
Unbelievably practical, extremely efficient.
Yeah.
And slowly, he starts to become the new de facto authority figure for the design team. So you have this huge shift. The transition from a company led by intuition, meaning, I just feel this is right, to a company led strictly by data. The spreadsheet says this is the most efficient path.
So the creative void left by Steve is rapidly being filled by spreadsheets and operational metrics. But there's still this massive struggle for power happening at the very top.
There is.
Which brings us to part 2 of the story. The consolidation of power. Because Joni Ive didn't just roll over and give up immediately. In fact, for a little while, he actually got more powerful.
He did. And that consolidation of power came directly at the expense of another major player, Scott Forstall.
Okay, we have to unpack the Scott Forstall drama, because he was the software guy, right?
Yeah.
The guy who basically made the original iPhone actually function.
He was the head of iOS. And in many ways, Forstall was the closest thing to Steve Jobs left at the entire company.
How so?
He was brilliant, he was wildly ambitious, he was incredibly abrasive, and he really didn't get along well with others. He drove a flashy silver Mercedes. He even wore the same kind of clothes as Steve. He was widely seen internally as a mini Steve.
And what was his relationship with Joni Ive like?
They were mortal enemies. They absolutely despised each other. It was the ultimate clash of two entirely different philosophies. Forstall loved what we call skeuomorphism.
Okay, let's define that for the listeners. Skeuomorphism.
It's the design philosophy where digital objects on a screen purposely mimic real-world physical objects. Think about the original iPhone Notes app.
Oh yeah, it looked like actual yellow legal paper with torn edges at the top.
Exactly. The Game Center app looked like a green felt casino table. The calendar app had fake leather stitching around the borders.
And Steve Jobs really loved that stuff.
He loved it. He thought it made new, intimidating technology feel highly approachable. If the digital calendar looks like a physical pocketbook, you instinctively know how to use it.
Joni Ive hated it.
He loathed it. He thought it was intellectually dishonest. He thought it was kitsch. He wanted clean lines, flat colors, absolute digital purity.
So you have these two massive titans clashing over the fundamental look of Apple, and the ultimate breaking point was Apple Maps.
The Maps disaster, we all remember it. Apple decided to kick Google Maps off the iPhone as the default and replaced it with their own highly touted version.
And it was bad.
It was practically a hallucination. You'd search for a gas station and it would drop a pin right in the middle of a river.
The 3D view of the Brooklyn Bridge looked like it had melted in the sun.
It was a profound humiliation for Apple on a global stage. And Tim Cook, being the guy who values supreme accountability and teamwork above all else, needed to fix it fast. He wanted Forstall to sign a public apology letter.
Taking the blame.
Right. He wanted Forstall to own the mistake in front of the customers.
And Forstall refused.
Flat out refused. He thought it wasn't a big deal, or at least that the apology shouldn't come from him personally. He tried to play internal politics.
And that was it?
That was it. Tim Cook fired him.
Boom. Gone. The mini Steve was just out.
And this is such a pivotal moment in the timeline. It definitively showed that Tim Cook had zero tolerance for the kind of brilliant jerk behavior that Steve Jobs used to actively tolerate and sometimes even encourage.
Cook wanted harmony.
He demanded harmony.
But by firing Forstall, he created this massive power vacuum in the software division. And who stepped in to fill it? Jony Ive. This is where Jony gets the absolute keys to the kingdom. He's not just doing hardware anymore, the physical aluminum and glass of the phone. He's now entirely in charge of human interface, the software, the fundamental look and feel of every pixel on your screen.
And this immediately leads to iOS 7, the era of flat design.
The neon revolution. I remember updating my phone and suddenly everything was bright white and neon pink.
Exactly. Jony completely wiped out all the leather and the green felt. He introduced sheer layers, translucency, super thin typography. It was highly controversial at the time.
Yeah, people hated it at first.
They did. But it was Jony's massive declaration of independence. It emphatically proved he could lead a huge product shift without Steve. But, and here's the massive catch-in, it also piled an unbelievable amount of managerial responsibility onto him.
Right, because now he's designing the hardware, he's designing the software, and he's also designing the massive new campus, Apple Park.
He's managing hundreds and hundreds of people across entirely different disciplines.
And remember, this is a guy who historically hates bureaucracy. He's an artist at heart. He wants to be in the machine shop making things, not sitting in endless budget meetings with HR.
And he's profoundly lonely. The book really hammers this emotional point home. Without Steve there to filter his wildest ideas, without Steve to aggressively fight the corporate battles with engineering and marketing, Jony is doing it all completely by himself.
He's taking all the incoming fire.
Yes, and he's exhausted. He's overwhelmed. And you really see this deep sadness come out at his 50th birthday party.
The Jony 50, this wasn't just a sheet cake in the break room.
No, not at all. This was a lavish two-day extravaganza in San Francisco. Huge celebrities, insane grandeur, the absolute peak of high society.
But there was this underlying melancholy to the whole thing.
There was. Laureen Powell Jobs gave a speech at the event. And she spoke so beautifully about the creative epiphany she used to witness between Steve and Jony. She described them walking together in the garden, constantly finishing each other's sentences.
It was a beautiful tribute, but it also violently highlighted exactly what was missing.
Exactly. Jony was celebrating turning 50, surrounded by hundreds of the most famous people in the world, but his one true spiritual partner wasn't there.
And I think that intense loneliness, that desperate desire to do something incredibly big to prove that Apple still had the old magic, is exactly what led to the Apple Watch, which really kicks off part 3 of our story.
The Apple Watch is the definitive turning point in the book. It is the exact moment where Jony Ive's soaring ambition violently collided with the cold new reality of Tim Cook's Apple.
Or as Jony probably saw it, it was the moment Apple would finally transcend tech and become Cartier.
This part of the book feels almost like a fever dream now, because we all know the Apple Watch today is this rugged fitness tracker that closes your rings.
Right, people wear it to the gym.
But Jony's original vision was completely different. He didn't want to make a tech gadget. He wanted to make high-end jewelry.
And he was completely obsessed with the materials. This wasn't just a matter of painting the aluminum gold. Apple actually invented an entirely new alloy for this.
Wait, they invented a new type of gold. They literally did. Standard 18-karat gold is relatively soft. It easily scratches and dings. That's perfectly fine for a necklace, but it's terrible for a watch that you bang against doors every day.
Right.
So Jony had the Apple Materials Science team, the exact same hardcore scientists figuring out chemically hardened glass for the iPhone screens. He had them create a custom gold alloy that was significantly harder than any standard gold on the market.
That is just such a quintessential Apple detail. We can't just buy gold. We have to reinvent the molecular structure of gold.
It perfectly shows the absolute level of perfectionism Jony was operating at. But here is where the hubris really kicks in. Jony wasn't just designing a watch. He was trying to design a social hierarchy. He created the Apple Watch edition.
The solid gold one.
Solid gold. And the
Yeah.
pricing started at $10,000 and went all the way up to $17,000.
$17,000 for a piece of consumer electronics.
Yes. And to launch it, they didn't go to a standard tech convention like WWDC. Joni insisted on building this massive, pristine white tent right in the middle of Cupertino. He wanted the event to feel exactly like a Paris fashion runway.
They flew in the heavy hitters.
They flew in the top editors of Vogue, Vanity Fair, the absolute fashion elite from Paris and Milan. They even had Karl Lagerfeld there, Anna Wintour.
He hired Angela Ahrens from Burberry to come run Apple Retail. He brought in his famous designer friend Mark Newson. He was essentially trying to build a luxury fashion house inside a tech company.
He really was.
But where is Tim Cook during all of this? Because this seems so incredibly far outside his Toyota Camry personality.
Cook signed off on it, but he remained very distant from the actual execution. He delegated all the difficult details to Jeff Williams. And this is the crucial disconnect. Cook looked at the gold watch and likely just saw a phenomenal high-margin SKU on a spreadsheet.
Right. If we sell a watch for $17,000 and it only costs $2,000 to manufacture, that's incredible gross margin.
He saw the spreadsheet, not the cultural status symbol.
But how did the market react?
The market saw a delusion. Because unlike a mechanical Rolex, which you buy once and pass down to your grandson, an Apple Watch relies entirely on a digital processor.
And tech ages fast.
In 3 years, the internal battery degrades, the silicon chip is too slow to run the new iOS update, and suddenly—
Or just have a $17,000 paperweight strapped to your wrist.
Exactly. It was technological obsolescence violently colliding with the concept of timeless luxury. And luxury lost badly.
The sales were terrible.
Abysmal. The fashion world politely clapped at the tent event, drank the champagne, and then immediately went back to wearing their Swiss mechanical watches.
So Apple is forced to do the pivot.
The very quiet, very swift pivot. They stopped talking about luxury and high fashion in their keynotes and started talking almost exclusively about fitness and health.
Closing your rings, heart rate monitoring, fall detection.
And it worked. As a fitness device, the watch became an absolute massive global hit.
But for Joni?
For Joni, it was a profound, deeply personal defeat. It absolutely broke him. He felt that the company, and honestly the world, had totally rejected his highest artistic aspiration to make Apple a true luxury brand.
He realized that Apple was fundamentally a company that moved volume units, not a company that made bespoke art.
Exactly. And so he quietly started looking for the exit.
And that deep sting seems to be exactly what triggered the long drift. This is part 4 of the book.
Yeah.
Joni essentially just starts checking out.
He does. He actively wants to quit. He's completely burned out. He actually tells Tim Cook he's done.
But Cook can't let him leave.
No, because Tim Cook knows that if Joni Ive formally resigns, the stock market will absolutely panic. It would be the undeniable, flashing red signal to Wall Street that the soul of Apple is definitively gone.
So they cook up a compromise deal.
The Chief Design Officer title. In 2015, Joni is officially named Chief Design Officer. Now, to the public, it sounds like a massive promotion. But the book reveals it was actually just a golden cage.
It was a way to manage his exit.
It was a way for Joni to completely step back from day-to-day management without spooking the shareholders. He happily handed off all the administrative stuff, the HR meetings, the budget reviews to other people, and basically became a highly paid part-time employee.
A part-time employee with a custom private jet.
A private jet that he spent months redesigning the interior of, naturally. He essentially stops coming to the main office. He's traveling to London. He's spending weeks in Hawaii.
And he's taking on these totally random side projects, right? Like designing a Christmas tree for Claridge's Hotel in London.
Yes, an immersive Christmas tree installation. That's exactly where his head was at. He was desperately looking for creative and artistic fulfillment anywhere but Apple.
Meanwhile, back at Cupertino, without Joni's daily presence and protection, the operations team, all the Tim Cooks, started systematically taking full control of the product pipeline.
And there is this one story in the book that is just.
Yeah.
It is the soap dispenser story.
Yes. I need you to explain this to the listener because it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but it perfectly encapsulates the dysfunction.
It really is the ultimate symbol of how broken things had become.
Yeah.
So Joni has this incredible private Gulfstream jet, and he redesigns the interior, obviously. But he finds a microscopic flaw in the custom soap dispensers in the bathroom.
Okay.
They aren't working exactly right. The mechanism feels a little clunky to him. So instead of hiring a high-end plumber or a specialized aviation mechanic,
Don't tell me.
Apple's actual internal engineering team, the incredibly brilliant people who should be laser-focused on building the next generation iPhone or Mac, are officially tasked with fixing the soap dispensers on Joni's private jet.
That is just wild.
It perfectly highlights the massive resentment building up inside the company. You have these hardcore engineers working late nights, trying to hit impossible launch deadlines, trying to ship complex products for hundreds of millions of customers.
And they're being ordered to fix the boss's fancy bathroom fixtures.
On a plane he actively uses to stay away from the office. It just shows how entirely disconnected Joni had become from the rank-and-file workers.
And while Joni is off fixing soap dispensers and designing hotel Christmas trees, Apple is internally desperate for the next big thing.
They need a new category.
Right, because iPhone sales are finally leveling off. Everyone already has a smartphone. They desperately need a massive hit to keep the growth going, so they spin up Project Titan, the Apple car.
The Apple car. The incredibly secretive project that was supposed to save them. They hired thousands of automotive engineers. And Joni had this wild vision of a car with absolutely no steering wheel.
Like a living room on wheels.
Exactly. He wanted the passengers to face each other on these plush, curved benches.
But the fundamental technology wasn't anywhere close to being ready.
Not even remotely close. True full self-driving is an insanely hard problem, and the book describes this incredibly cringy internal demo they did.
Tell us about the demo.
Joni urgently wants to show Tim Cook what the magical car experience will eventually feel like. But since they don't have a working self-driving car, they essentially stage it.
Like a play.
Like a middle school play. Joni sits in a wooden mock-up of the car cabin, and he talks to Siri. But it's not actually Siri running on code.
Wait, really?
It's literally a human actor sitting in a hidden booth outside the room, reading lines into a microphone.
Just like the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Exactly. Joni would say, Siri, what that nice restaurant we just passed? And the human actor says, that's Nobu.
It was pure fantasy.
A total fantasy. And when the harsh engineering reality finally clashed with Joni's lofty design dreams, when the engineers told him, Joni, we actually need a physical steering wheel because the car will crash and kill people otherwise, Joni completely lost interest.
He checked out of the car project, too.
He mentally walked away.
So if he's not focused on the watch, and he's abandoned the car, and he's barely engaged with the annual phone updates, what is he actually doing?
He's building the campus, Apple Park, the giant spaceship. This megastructure became his absolute final obsession.
He poured everything into that building.
Every ounce of his perfectionism. He obsessed over the exact curvature of the exterior glass. He forced suppliers to create the largest curved glass sheets in human history.
Wow.
He obsessed over the specific tactile feel of the door handles, the specific species of drought-resistant trees planted in the inner courtyard.
The book calls the entire building a monument.
It is a monument, but the deep tragedy of it is it's a beautifully sterile monument. The book vividly points out that the architectural design of the building actually physically separated the executive leaders from the product creatives.
Oh, that's interesting, because in the old campus...
In the old campus, Infinite Loop, people constantly bumped into each other in the central hallways. There was this messy, chaotic, collaborative cross-pollination.
But in the spaceship...
In the spaceship, everyone is segmented into these isolated glass pods. It's breathtakingly beautiful, but it's completely cold. It perfectly represents the new era of the corporate machine, not the bygone era of the messy, collaborative garage.
It's a pristine temple built to a god that had already left.
That is exactly what it is.
So we have a sterile, isolating campus, a totally bored lead designer, and a CEO who prefers spreadsheets to product magic. This all inevitably brings us to part 5, the divorce. Because eventually the cord just had to be cut.
And the writing was clearly on the wall. Apple's entire business model was fundamentally shifting underneath them. Tim Cook realized the golden supercycle of iPhone hardware sales was officially over.
Everyone in the developed world had a smartphone. You couldn't just endlessly rely on selling them a brand new piece of hardware every 12 months.
So they execute a massive pivot to services.
Extraction.
That's the exact strategy. You already have a billion iPhones sitting in people's pockets around the globe. How do you constantly extract monthly rent from that installed base?
You sell them iCloud storage subscriptions.
Apple Music,
Yeah.
Apple TV plus Yeni Spazier. You take a massive 30% cut of everything through App Store fees.
And this creates a culture clash of absolutely epic proportions inside the company.
Massive. Think about it. Hardware design is entirely about taking years to make a physical object insanely great. and then launching it once.
So it's the tangible object.
Right. Services, on the other hand, is purely about recurring revenue, minimizing churn rates, driving daily active user metrics. It's a completely different brain. The soul of the company violently shifted from the artist design studio to the operator's server farm.
And Joni Ive obviously has no place in a server farm.
None.
Wow.
So in 2019, it finally happens.
This formal departure. And in true dramatic Joni style, it was incredibly cinematic. He actually gathers his core team in a private theater to watch a movie.
Yes, he does.
Which movie was it?
Yesterday.
The Danny Boyle movie.
Yes. The movie about a world where a massive blackout happens and suddenly the Beatles never existed.
Oh, that is almost too on the nose.
It is incredibly poignant, though. He specifically shows them this film about a gray world without the greatest, most transformative artists of all time. It's almost like he's quietly saying to them, imagine a corporate world without me.
Wow. And then what?
Then the lights come up, and he simply tells them, I'm leaving Apple. I'm starting my own independent firm called Love From.
And what was the team's reaction?
Utter shock. People were literally whispering, holy Feth, this is actually happening.
Even though he had been drifting for years at that point.
Right. Everyone knew he was checked out. But the stark finality of it was still terrifying. It was the undeniable end of the era.
So how did they celebrate?
They had a private party at a high-end restaurant with the band LCD sound system playing in the background.
Which feels very 2000s cool.
Very. But
Okay.
then he was just gone.
The book points out that Apple quietly removed his bio from the corporate leadership website late at night with absolutely zero fanfare. Just a silent update to the HTML. The author wrote, he was there one day and gone the next.
It's just completely erased. The man who designed the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, erased from the leadership page like he was a mid-level manager.
It was the ultimate corporate uncoupling. Clean, ruthlessly efficient, no messy public drama.
Just exactly the way Tim Cook likes it.
So, bringing this all together as we hit the outro here, we are left with what the book brilliantly calls the trillion-dollar paradox.
And this is the deep nuance we really have to sit with. Because it's easy to just bash Cook.
Yeah.
But if you look strictly at the financial numbers, Tim Cook is an absolute genius.
He really is. He made Apple the most valuable company in human history.
He expertly navigated the volatile Donald Trump presidency, the massive trade wars with China, the nightmare scenarios in the global supply chain during the pandemic. He made the company incredibly safe.
He made it profitable far beyond Steve Jobs' wildest, most ambitious dream.
He did. But you have to ask, at what ultimate cost? The cost was the soul of the place, the sheer unpredictability, the mandate to be insanely great, the feeling that a new product could genuinely change the trajectory of your life, not just slightly better manage your daily calendar.
Under Cook, Apple became a utility.
A necessary, highly reliable, incredibly profitable utility. It's like your local electric company. You absolutely need it to live. You pay for it every single month without fail, but you certainly don't love it.
The magic is just gone.
Because the alchemy of early Apple required both halves. It absolutely needed the visionary, crazy artist in Steve and Joni.
And it needed the brilliant, grounded operator in Tim.
Exactly. Without the artist dreaming up the impossible, the operator just relentlessly optimizes the mundane.
The book leaves us with this incredibly haunting final image. It's the remaining design team standing inside that beautiful, completely sterile Apple Park, just silently watching the sunset through those massive curved glass walls.
It's a rare moment of them actually looking up from the relentless daily grind. They are standing inside the single most expensive office building on Earth, working for the absolute richest company in human history.
And they're just wondering what the future holds.
They're wondering, can a company run purely by accountants and supply chain managers ever truly change the world again? Or are they just destined to endlessly manage it?
That is the ultimate question this book leaves you with. Can a spreadsheet actually change the world?
I think we're clearly seeing the answer right now. A spreadsheet can absolutely run the world. It can extract endless profit from the world.
But fundamentally changing it, inspiring it, that takes an artist.
And the artist has officially left the building.
This has been our deep dive on After Steve. Thank you so much for exploring this with us.